Our lessons today are going to be from the Old Testament, the book of Kings. And interesting fact, I learned, I wasn't real familiar with the story that we're going to hear about today, so I was doing all kinds of research and found some interesting facts, fun facts. So Kings 1 and Kings 2 are the history of Judah and Israel. And an interesting fact that when Kings was being written down, it was too long to fit on one scroll. So that's why there's Kings 1 and Kings 2. So the first part of Kings 2 that you're going to hear today is the history of the two kingdoms before 722 BC, when the northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians. And Samaria, the capital of Israel, was destroyed, and only Judah was left. In this story, there's also going to be mentioned leprosy. And in doing a little bit of research on that, I just came across something that said that the Hebrew term for leprosy, I'm not even going to pronounce it because I'll obliterate it, but it refers to not the leprosy that we're familiar with hearing about, which is the disfiguring and disabling bacterial disease. But this is more like skin blemishes and eruptions. And whenever anybody has anything like that, apparently at the time that they rendered somebody unclean, and the results of it was a social stigma and exclusion. So there is a person I'm going to reading about. His name is Naaman, and he has leprosy. So today's reading is divided into two parts, so I'm going to start with the first part. The second part will be our second lesson. Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. This girl said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord, the king of Aram, just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Well, go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends words to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry, and he went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached him and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, wash and be clean? So Naaman went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and he stood before him, and he said, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing. And Naaman urged Elisha to accept, but Elisha refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. Amen.
I think the story of Naaman is a fun story. As far as I know, there's no archaeological evidence that there was a military leader from Aram named Naaman who lived in the 9th century BCE, which is roughly when this story is set. Yes, there was a country called Aram that was northeast of the kingdom of Israel at the time, and Aram was a kingdom, as in it had a king. As far as the kingdom having a highly successful military leader named Naaman, let alone a successful military leader who had leprosy, I don't think that matters. What matters is, the amusing things that are happening in this story. The historicity of Naaman's not important. As Sandy pointed out in our Monday morning Bible study, perhaps this is a story that should be best looked at like a parable than try to find some historical accuracy in it. Now, some of the humor in this story gets lost in translation. This is one of those stories where the character of the characters are revealed in their names. You know, that literary device where the name of someone sort of hints at what you're supposed to be thinking about them from the beginning. But we lose that because we don't speak Hebrew. Elisha means God's salvation. Naaman means beautiful, fair, gracious. That's why I call him Captain Yummy. And Gehazi, who you will hear about more in a few minutes, literally means valley vision. Now, if we've been reading 2 Kings, we know Elisha. He's been the co-star for much of 1 Kings. And in chapter 2 of 2 Kings, he gets promoted to being the main character. He takes over for the prophet Elijah. And we know he's connected to God, that he's God's prophet. And if we missed that in the telling of the story, we get hints of it in his name. God is salvation. Naaman, beautiful, fair Naaman, Captain Yummy, has leprosy. Captain Beautiful has leprosy. You get the joke there in his name? And as Ricky said, the term leprosy doesn't necessarily mean Hansen's disease. There are lots of skin conditions that were lumped together under that label in the Hebrew scriptures. But we do know that he had something. It was probably disfiguring. It certainly would have given him his social interactions challenges because of having this disease, and it may have caused him pain. Every time we hear Naaman's name in the story, we're supposed to feel the paradox. And then there's Gehazi. Now think for a moment what having valley vision would mean, as opposed to mountaintop vision. Mountaintop vision, you can see out into the distance. You can see the faraway place. You can get the big picture. When you've got valley vision, you can see, as far as the next building or the next tree, the next groves. You can't see very far ahead. You lack perspective. You lack a sense of vision. We'll find out soon that Gehazi does, in fact, lack vision and perspective. Now, all the other characters in this story don't have names. They have jobs, but they don't have names. Slave girl captured in Israel. Wife of Naaman, king of Aram, king of Israel. Servants of Naaman, but no names. So here's what happened. Captain Yummy comes back from war, a great hero. A captive young girl is dragged back with him from Israel, enslaved and put in his household as his wife's servant. Sadly, because of Captain Yummy's leprosy, he's not able to go to any of the parties that are being held because he's such a big war hero. Then this enslaved girl tells his wife, her mistress, about the prophet in Israel, and the wife tells the husband about the prophet in Israel, and the husband tells his king, the king of Aram, about the prophet in Israel, and the king of Aram sends Captain Yummy off with a ton of money. The amount of gold and silver that he's carrying is crazy, along with a whole bunch of clothing. I guess they were clothes horses back there. And goes off to go find a cure for this skin disorder that he has. When Captain Yummy presented himself to the king of Israel with a letter from the king of Aram, the king of Israel went into a panic. Can I cure leprosy? Who am I to be able to do this? The king of Aram is doing this because he knows I'm going to fail and he's going to use it to pick a fight with us. It's all a pretext to get us into war. It's all a big conspiracy. When word got to Elisha that the king of Israel is in a panic, he sends a message to the king and says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Just send him to me." So Naaman is sent to Elisha's house, and he goes to Elisha's house with his entourage, and Elisha doesn't even come out to greet him. He just sends a messenger with directions. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. And I love Naaman's response to that. Big, strong Captain Yummy, who goes into a rage that Elisha doesn't even come out and do some religious song and dance. He doesn't offer any incantations. He gives him a task to do, and it's the simplest thing in the world. Go down to a river and bathe, and look at that river that I'm being sent to. It's this muddy Jordan River, and don't we have rivers back back home in Damascus that are actually clean and beautiful and free-flowing, and shouldn't I wash there instead? At least something like that. And he gets some advice in his rage from one of his servants, more sensible than he is. If the prophet commanded you to do something difficult, you would have done it. And all he's saying is just go wash. So just go wash. Just give it a try. Thanks to his servant's sensibility, Naaman did as he was directed, and his flesh was restored and finally reflected his name. Captain Yummy is truly Captain Yummy now. Naaman returned to Elisha's house filled with awe and gratitude. Maybe it was a good thing that this king sent him to Israel with all that treasure, because he wants to give some to Elisha for restoring him, for curing this ailment. And Elisha does not want the gift. So Captain Yummy asks for 2 mule loads of dirt, which probably seems a little weird. But then he explains why he wants it. We can assume he makes this request to bring some soil from Israel back to his home so that he can make a spot in his yard that is Israel. Dirt from Israel, and that he can go there and be in Israel to pray to the God of Israel. Because he says that's what he's going to do, that's all I'm praying to too. There's no other God but the God of Israel. So That's what I'm going to do. Now, that's where the readings that we heard ended, but that's not where the story ends. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the story. Feel free to read it because I'm going to sort of paraphrase a bit here. So we get there. Captain Yummy is saying that there's no God except the God in Israel, and that's the only God I'm going to worship ever, except maybe sometimes I'm going to have to go into the house of Rimmon, who is the God that my king worships, and I sometimes have to go with him to worship him. So that's okay if I sort of bow down to him too, right? And Elisha says, go in peace. Don't sweat it. And now we come to Valley View, Gehazi, one of Elisha's servants. Naaman has offered a huge treasure to Elisha, and Elisha has refused it. And Gehazi goes, maybe I could get some of that. So he runs off. Naaman's on his way back home, runs off, catches up with him and says, Elisha changed his mind. He wants a little contribution for some of his disciples, maybe a talent of silver and a couple changes of clothes or something like that. And Naaman is like so grateful. He says, here, 2 talents of silver, take that. In fact, it's so heavy, he has to send a couple of his servants. Naaman sends a couple of his servants to carry all this stuff that he's been given back to Gehazi's home. Well, meanwhile, Elisha knew exactly what Gehazi did and called him on it. When Elisha pronounced the consequences of Gehazi's greed, and I'm going to quote from the New Revised Standard Version here, Elisha told Gehazi, therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So Gehazi left Elisha's presence leprous, as white as snow. This last sentence in the story, we learn something about the skin condition that Naaman had. It was a disease that turned his skin white. The same thing that happened to Gehazi. His skin turned white. This disease of whiteness. It was all considered leprosy. Would have affected their social relations, this disease of whiteness. And it makes me wonder how contemporary experiences of the disease of whiteness impacts our social relationships. And I wonder what it takes to heal the disease of whiteness. I said in our gathering reflection that I think there's a difference between cure and healing. A cure reverses the immediate problem. If a person is cured of cancer, that cancer has been defeated and no longer afflicts. Healing goes deeper. Healing goes beyond the physical. Healing is about the whole person, including the spiritual, emotional, and social dimensions of their lives. We are in the midst of our annual fall pledge campaign. So I think about the disease of whiteness. I have to think about how it impacts us financially as well. We know that Indigenous, Black, and Latinx folk earn around 75 cents for every dollar that's earned by a white person. While earning less does not limit one's ability to be generous, it does limit how much one can give in their generosity. And for folk who are white, the disease of whiteness can impact the choices we make or the expectations we have when we do giving. For instance, the disease of whiteness can cause us to think, those of us who are white, to make assumptions about our relationships between the giver and the receiver, continuing to colonizing mindset and fostering continued white supremacy. I think about some of the ways the disease of whiteness shows up in our society that are echoed in our story. We think about who had their feet on the ground in the story. Despite being enslaved, this captive in the household of Naaman allowed herself to speak. She did not take her position and let it silence her, despite the power and might of the Armenian victors. Neither awe nor cowed, she continued to speak her truth. And there are Naaman's servants who advise him to just do what the prophet asks. And people have so much more sense. These people, these nameless people who have no power, have so much more sense than the big boys in the story. The big boys in the story, even the nameless big boys in the story, almost start a war with each other because of their paranoia, their fear and suspicion. The contrast between the nonsense of the people with power, which is a common manifestation of the disease of whiteness, and the sense of the people without power continues even in the leprosy cure Naaman experiences. His flesh was restored to the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. The big man became a little boy. You can almost hear the air hissing as his ego is deflated. Captain Yummy could only be cured when he started listening to the common people around him. And in listening to the common people around him, he was also healed. What happens in our life? Do we get caught up in the big events, or do we pay attention to the small truths? Do we value what seems grand instead of the everyday? For instance, when we think about a challenging problem like homelessness, from whom do we seek wisdom? Do we seek out answers from corporate heads and foundations and politicians, or do we seek the wisdom from the people who are actually experiencing homelessness or being underhoused? It's very possible, likely in fact, that Naaman looked down on Israel, that prejudice had influenced the way he saw these people, that prejudice had shaped his view. And it was only when he listened to his servants and followed the directions from an Israelite that he had thought had treated him disrespectfully in the first place that he found healing. This plays out too in the actions of Gehazi. Mr. Valley View can't stand that Elisha won't charge Naaman for the healing. So he took matters into his own hands, vowing to make Captain Yummy pay up. Lying, he told Naaman that Elisha wanted money after all to help some of his disciples. 2 talents of silver, 2 changes of clothing will do. A talent of silver and 2 changes, and Captain Yummy gives him 2 talents. Each wrapped up in fine cloths, carried by 2 servants. In some ways, I think Gehazi was afflicted by whiteness even before he got Naaman's skin disease that caused him to turn white. Gehazi wanted spare change, and Elisha wanted real change. The kinds of ways Naaman changed tell us something important about our own transformations. Naaman came to Elisha full of pride. It took a bit, but he was able to curb it, to humble himself, to find a beauty that was deeper than his skin. And yet, even in the midst of this conversion from prideful soldier to humble servant, we see how much work remained. After the miracle, the captain responded with a confession of faith. Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. As amazing as this is, Naaman shows the incompleteness of his transformation. But, he said, would it be all right if I still worshiped, or at least acted like I was worshiping the god Rimnon, the God of my king. Elisha accepted Naaman's limitations. Go in peace, he told him. That's where I see the deepest grace in this story. There in that short little line, go in peace. The prophet could see the captain caught between his past self and the person he was becoming. And the prophet, and even more so God, will wait for him to fully live into his name. It's true for us too. We seek healing in our lives, to be better people, to be more loving, to be more generous, to be more patient. We don't always get it right, and we certainly don't always get it done completely. We are on a journey toward becoming more and more whole. God knows our incompleteness and yet says to us, be healed, go in peace. Well, I've had more than my fair share of time talking about healing. Let's do some imagining together. Spend a couple minutes, 2.5 minutes, imagining what a world of healing would be like and how our church might help build it.